Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into what is, without a doubt, one of the biggest stories of our time, the great AI race between the US and China.
So, who's really ahead? It's the question on everyone's mind, right? Who's winning this thing? Well, it turns out the answer isn't, some simple finish line. The reality is way more complicated, and honestly, way more interesting.
Yeah, trying to use a simple scorecard just doesn't work. It completely misses the point. Because leadership in AI, it's not about just one thing. It really all comes down to what you even mean by ahead. So, to really wrap our heads around this, we've got to break down what AI leadership actually is today. And it's really measured across four main pillars. How good are your AI models? Who controls the computer chips? Who's doing the best research? And who's actually using AI out there in the real world?
All right, let's get into it. And seriously, forget the idea of a simple race. A much better way to think about this is like a giant, multidimensional game of chess. You make one move over here, say with computer chips, and it can totally change the entire board, affecting everything else, like how you can build new AI models.
Okay, first up, let's look at the core technology itself. This is the real battleground. We're talking about the AI models, the brains of the whole operation, and the super powerful chips that act as the engines.
When you look at the absolute cutting edge, the most powerful AI models out there, the US has a slight edge right now. You've got companies like OpenAI and Google DeepMind that are kind of setting the gold standard. But, and this is a big but, that lead is getting smaller fast. Companies in China like Zhipu AI and Baidu are catching up at an incredible speed. And their models are super optimized for Mandarin and their own massive domestic ecosystem.
But the models are only one piece of the puzzle. The really interesting strategic part, it's the hardware, the chips. AI needs a ton of computing power, and that means semiconductors. Now, this is where the US has a huge structural advantage, and it's using it. They put export controls in place to make it harder for China to get the most advanced chips. So what does China do? They're responding by pouring an insane amount of money into building up their own chip industry, with companies like Huawei leading the charge.
And this right here, this is that chessboard analogy in action, perfectly. The US creates what's essentially a choke point with the chips. It's a strategic move. And China's countermove is brilliant. They're not just trying to copy the chips, they're trying to innovate around the problem. They're working on new algorithms that are more efficient, so they don't even need those super high-end chips. It's a classic move and countermove.
Of course, all this technology doesn't just appear out of thin air, right? It's all about people, which brings us to our next big area, the human factor, the minds and the manpower actually building all this stuff. When you look at research, you see this really fascinating split. It's a classic quantity versus quality story. If you just count the sheer number of AI research papers being published, China is way out in front. The scale is just massive. But if you look at what's considered the most important, the most cited, the really foundational breakthroughs, well, the US is still leading there.
So this all feeds into two totally different approaches to talent. The US basically acts like a global magnet for the best AI researchers from all over the world. China's strategy is different. It leans into its incredible scale, graduating this just enormous number of engineers every single year to create a massive domestic workforce.
Okay, so we've got the tech and we've got the people. Now what about the money and the markets? Let's follow the cash and see how all this AI is actually being used in the real economy.
And again, the approaches here could not be more different. In the US, it's all about that decentralized, kind of chaotic, venture capital-fueled model. The classic Silicon Valley risk-taking ecosystem. China's approach is the polar opposite. It's a state-coordinated effort totally focused on integrating AI into key industries at a huge scale. The money often follows exactly what the national plan says.
And you can really boil this whole dynamic down to one simple idea, which is a great quote: the US excels at disruptive innovation. They're great at coming up with that crazy new idea. But China excels at rapid scaling. They are unbelievably good at taking an idea and rolling it out across their entire economy.
And that skill, that mastery of scaling, gives China a huge advantage in one really critical area: actually getting AI out there and using it. I mean, China is putting AI into everything. We're talking manufacturing, logistics, entire smart cities, not to mention the massive fintech platforms from companies like Tencent and Alibaba. They're leveraging these gigantic pools of data from their super apps to deploy AI on a scale that, well, nobody else can really match.
Okay, so let's zoom out for our final piece of the puzzle. How do these domestic strengths play out on the world stage? What's the geopolitical game plan here?
On the government and regulation side, the difference is night and day. In the US, it's this complicated dance between government and private companies with a lot of debate around safety and ethics. China's strategy, it's totally centralized. They have these long-term national plans, and the number one goal is clear: become completely self-sufficient in this technology.
And this competition isn't staying domestic, it's absolutely spilling out globally. You have American companies basically dominating Western markets and setting the standards for things like APIs. At the same time, China's exporting its AI tech, things like smart city systems and surveillance tech, to other countries, especially in the developing world. What's happening is the world is starting to split into two separate tech ecosystems, two spheres of influence.
Okay, so we've looked at the models, the machines, the minds, the money, and the global strategy. Let's bring it all back to where we started. Who is really ahead?
And looking at the scorecard, it's pretty clear there's no single winner. The leadership is split right down the middle. The US has that slim lead in the top-tier models and that venture-driven innovation. But China, they are the clear leader when it comes to actually deploying AI across society and industry, and the sheer scale of their engineering workforce is just unmatched. It's not a race with one winner. It's more like a balance of very, very different strengths.
And that really is the key thing to take away from all this. This isn't a zero-sum race where if one wins, the other has to lose. What we're actually seeing is the emergence of two parallel AI superpowers. Each one is busy building its own technological sphere of influence.
So maybe the question we should be asking isn't who's ahead today. Maybe the real question, the much more important one is, how is this rivalry going to shape our future? You know, things like AI safety, ethics, the kind of world we're all going to be living in. That's the real story to watch.